Hi guys, this is Vic from Plate.to.paper. In this watercolor food tutorial, we'll be painting a smiley egg toast with asparagus and bacon. This exercise and the materials I'll be referencing come from the first edition Watercolour Art Kit that I released with Mossery. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. Let's start with the colour mixes. For the inner breadcrumb, we'll use a mix of yellow ochre and white. For the crust, yellow ochre and opera pink. For the toasted areas, we'll add some permanent yellow to the mix. For the egg yolk base, permanent yellow and opera pink. We'll add more opera pink for the shading. For the cheeks, we'll use vermilion hue. For the bacon, yellow ochre and opera pink. Increase the concentration for shading. For the darkest values, opera pink, burnt sienna, and a touch of ultramarine. Next, the asparagus. We'll use permanent yellow and viridian. For shading, increase the amount of viridian. Add neutral tint for the darkest values. For the facial details, I'm mixing a seaweed colour using neutral tint, viridian, and burnt sienna. Then I'm using neutral tint and burnt sienna for the pepper, both concentrated and diluted. For the crumb holes and egg whites, I'm mixing a warm grey using white, burnt sienna and neutral tint. You can also just use white and neutral tint for the egg whites. Add a darker mix using yellow ochre, burnt sienna and ultramarine. For the most toasted bits of the bread, we can just use burnt sienna. Now our basic palette is done, so let's start painting. First, we'll be applying masking fluid to the facial details. I've dispensed some onto a piece of paper and using a skewer, I apply the fluid. We can start painting other areas while waiting for this to dry. We'll apply the beige mix to the inner crumb. I let it dry for 2 minutes, then I apply the first orange mix to the crust. While it's still wet, I've added some burnt sienna to the mix and used that to darken some areas. For the egg whites, I'm using a very diluted warm grey. And you can also use just a mix of white and neutral tint if you want it to lean cooler. You can soften the edges of what you've applied with a clean brush with water. If you don't like what you've applied, simply wet the area and lift with a clean paper towel or tissue, then wait for it to dry before painting again. Now, I'm applying the orange mix to the edges of the fried egg. Leave some spots unpainted and vary the thickness of the lines. Using my watercolor pencil, I mark out the details of the bacon. Then I use my first pink mix and apply it to the flesh portion of the bacon. Here, I'm using diluted orange for the fatty areas. Then I add to the values with the opera pink and burnt sienna mix. Now to the asparagus. I apply the permanent yellow and viridian mix to the stalks. Adding some subtle details to the head. For the egg yolk, I've mixed up both my base yellow and orange first, before applying the yellow to the yolk. While it's still wet, add the orange. We'll wait for it to dry before going over it again later. Let's continue developing the toast. I'm using a diluted mix here and applying it to areas where it's been more exposed to heat. Bread is not usually evenly toasted, so some areas will be darker and some lighter. You can see I'm using the same color to add small holes, and I'm doing this to portray the breadcrumb. I keep the direction of these strokes flowing in a spiral. Now I'm using burnt sienna to add some definition to the bread, also adding the holes to the transition area between the crust and the inner crumb. Now this part is really important. I'm using the warm grey and creating some small holes. This seemingly small inclusion instantly creates a sense of realism, and I make sure to do it whenever I paint bread. We'll come back to these later. Using the darker green mix, I'm adding more definition to the asparagus. I've applied some orange to darken the yolk. A quick round with the pencil to give a bit of definition to the shapes. Back to the yolk, I deepen some areas using the orange mix. If the areas surrounding the cheeks aren't too wet, you can apply red to them. If not, wait till it's dry and then paint it in. Here, I'm using the darker pink mix to add more definition to the bacon. It's not a completely flat surface, so I'm working to bring out the dips and the bends in the bacon. Now, I'm applying more burnt sienna to the edges of the crust and working more on the egg. Here, I'm going in with some warm grey to the egg whites. When painting these, I like to use a mix of greys together with a diluted yellow-orange, depending on how fried the egg is. For crispier edges, I'm applying more burnt sienna. I'm going in with more warm grey to the egg whites and dotting in some details. Using the dark brown mix, I'm painting in shadows cast by the toppings. And going back to the grey holes, adding even more depth to them. The shadows in these holes are determined by the direction of the light source, so keep them consistent. Now we can work on the face. Using clean fingers, I rub off the dried masking fluid. I carefully fill in the shapes with the green-black mix. I'm also applying it to the shadow cast by the egg and for details on the asparagus tops. Time for a little garnish with pepper using the black-brown mix. Some spots are more concentrated than others, and be sure to vary the size of the grains. From here, I'll continue adding finishing touches and more definition to the edges. Whenever I paint bread, I like to add a layer of orange to the edges here, just to bring out the toasted transition between the crumb and the crust. Now, the finishing touches. And we're done. Our smiley egg toast is complete. It's a really fun motif to work on with all the various parts, and I think the end result is really satisfying. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, or if you'd like to see a specific subject in a future video. See you in the next tutorial. Bye!